Thank you, everyone, for joining. This is the 2026 SNS Pulse Report webinar. My name is Steve Makaitis. I'm the lead network solutions engineer for C3 Technology Advisors. I'm joined by my counterpart, Mark Dreyfus.
Hi there, good afternoon. My name is Mark Dreyfus. I'm a network and managed service engineer here at C3. Today we hope to provide some great content on secure network service. Thanks for joining.
And we are also joined by panelists from our partner network. We have Jerry Young, Senior Manager of Sales Engineering for Central North America with Cato Networks. We've got Yulia Durier, Executive Director, Product Management, Secure Networking for Comcast Business. We've got Curtis Cooper, who's the Strategy and Adoption Specialist from GTT. And we've got Tom McCowan, Cloud Computing Architecture Specialist from US Signal. So we really appreciate everyone joining us, and we're just going to dive into some questions here. If you feel like there's something that you'd like to ask the group here, please don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. We'll be monitoring it as we go.
You can also ask a question in the Q&A tab, and we'll be monitoring that too. All right, so for the first question, this is to the group as a whole here. Across the environments you support, where do you most often see legacy WAN designs failing? Is it backhaul overload, appliance sprawl, fragmented management, or inconsistent security controls?
So I can take that first. So I've been just a little bit of background. Jerry Young. I've been at Cato Networks for about six and a half years, and we've seen a lot of transformation or change in the environments that we're dealing with. But I will be honest with you, majority of what I'm seeing is appliance sprawl and fragmented management. I'd say it's a combination of the two of those, because at the end of the day, right, legacy architecture, legacy designs fundamentally don't necessarily work. When you have multiple devices that you have to have FTEs to be able to manage and support, as well as each one of them having their own complex interface that's, again, more difficult to manage and support. A lot of customers that I'm going into, they have these devices, they're just kind of sitting there on the sidelines that are not even being leveraged. So they're paying for this investment, and they're not really taking advantage of it. The other element that I think that is incredibly important, from not only from a management perspective, that I've often seen, is that they don't share contextual information. So what that means, I'll take a step back. Each platform that you have does its own thing. This one's an IPS, it's focused on this. This is a secure web gateway, it's focused on that. This is an anti-malware engine, it's focused on that. But they don't have the context of all the other engines, and they're not sharing that context across each of their platforms to really enhance the effectiveness of the security overall.
Yeah, and I'll tail on to what Jerry said. I think I can agree with a lot of what Jerry's observations are. When we think about the organizations across the United States and even the globe, the transformation projects that have been occurring and continue to occur are driving change where AI initiatives typically are taking the front seat, and some of the content and the applications that are driving from the edge into, whether it's a cloud service provider or still a data center kind of an architecture, the networks are not necessarily designed for that large increase in traffic, or as well as the latency implications, which a legacy WAN would bring to the table. So I think, yeah, I agree with Jerry. I think that the transformations that most of the organizations are going through pretty quickly, and organizations are not able to prioritize the revamping of their layer 2, 3, and 7 networks.
So, Kurt, you bring up an interesting point. You're talking specifically about AI, right? The other challenge that I see specific to AI is the legacy models are designed with single source architecture that's specifically strategic, so that it's just isolating you by yourself. And when we start thinking about AI and AI convergence, it's all about big data. So the more information that we have, obviously, the better we're going to be able to provide the protections in the case of security when you're utilizing AI, or even just applications in general. Anything that's utilizing AI, the more information you have, the better those models are going to ultimately be. And ultimately that is what's going to provide you the best context without some of the hallucinations that we've traditionally seen when the models are still being developed and they don't have great sources of information.
And you bring up another good point, and I'm going to let go of the mic. There still appears organizationally to be disconnects between separate security groups and the networking groups in large enterprise class organizations. And so the strategies that are being developed aren't necessarily, I think, Jerry, to one of your points, a cohesive set of design criteria that builds the security model in conjunction with the network and transport layers. So, but great points, Jerry.
Yeah, I'd dovetail onto that. This is Tom McEwen. So, in organizations and what we've seen, right, in the space from the carrier perspective and the data center side for cloud is that, over time, legacy networks or customers, they've deployed a lot of security tools and network connectivity devices in as things mature, it's going back and redesigning for the architecture and the change. And that's the challenge. That's what really leads to appliance sprawl, multiple management planes, and really inconsistencies in policy enforcement. That's where we're seeing that kind of convergence sort of take place, moving towards the SASE space. So backhaul congestion is just really a symptom of, a centralized distributed network problem, and you'll see that over time.
Maybe just one use case that I think you kind of touched upon, but it is separate though of where we see is really customers who are not monitoring, they're not really active player, active agent in their network security implementations and basically how well their networks are performing. So if they haven't gotten a security breach, if they're not looking at their dashboards and really seeing the problems, and if we are managing that for the customer and they're just not aware of it, or alternatively, if it's a small customer who just really doesn't know any better and they're thinking, hey, you know what I have is just fine. And they maybe haven't outsourced all of their applications to the cloud yet. So they're still in that journey. That's where I also see just customers just not knowing any better. And they're like, just keep me on what I've got. I'm not yet ready to go and upgrade to the next generation.
Or the even scarier facet would be that they have been compromised and they are completely oblivious to the fact that that's taken place.
Excellent point.
Yeah, and I think that's you bring up a good point. When clients are ready to make the shift, right? And one of the things in the Pulse report that we identified was some of those paths, right? The decision-making paths that organizations need to go down. First of which is that, consolidation of the edge. Maybe an organization has SD-WAN, but they also have disparate firewalls in place. Taking the ability to consolidate that into a unified appliance fashion. The second of which would be full SASE adoption, right? I've got SD-WAN. I am utilizing more SaaS and cloud resources. I want to move that network layer up into the cloud. And finally, some organizations aren't ready for that. And maybe just extending your investment with your current SD-WAN or edge solution is what's best for you. So with that in mind, I wanted to ask Tom a question here. From the standpoint of the consolidated edge, for organizations that are consolidating that edge, SD-WAN combined with the next-gen firewall, what are the real-world benefits, and what are the trade-offs that they need to be ready for when they're making that type of a shift?
I think the real-world benefits is the alignment of networking and security, right? From visibility, posturing, and enforcement. And so what you used to have is separate silos are now converging together, right? So you have simplistic visibility in, when we talk about like edge consolidation, I don't want to say it's really about reducing devices. It's more about reducing operational friction, because that's typically what we see is over tooling, separate paneling, and not a lot of correlation that tends to take place. And that lags in reaction as well as, impacting the end user experience. So I'd say that's really where things is. It's about cleaner, clearer enforcement in getting that consolidation in place.
All right. This question is for Jerry. So if a client has decided that they want to move to the cloud with SASE, if the customer is considering move to SASE, what should they evaluate first? Is it user experience, security coverage, global reach, or integration with your existing tools and platforms?
It's an interesting question. It's also one that's kind of tough to answer because everybody's journey is unique to each of them, right? So the last thing I would want to do is walk in and say user experience is the end all be all when a customer's coming from a space where they're not even looking at the user today. So it's really about navigating and understanding exactly what it is that you're looking to try to achieve because these tools offer lots of different things, whether it be the user experience, the coverage from a security perspective, and how how they can enhance their security architecture today, or whether it be that they're a global organization that needs global presence throughout the world. Like each of those things is going to be unique for each customer. So it's really about honestly, I think one of the biggest challenges that customers often have is they got to take a step back and really try to understand what it is that they're trying to achieve before they pick a platform to look at because each one is unique and has different pros and cons that are associated to it. But also, like, I don't want to waste your time on talking about globally available resources when you're a company that is fundamentally designed to stay within the continental US. It just logically doesn't make sense.
I'm glad Jerry got that question first. When we look at a lot of the mid and enterprise class organizations, the roadmaps that are being defined from the board on downward, the roadmaps are defining several key components, at least in my experience, and that is looking at the assets that they have in play. So perhaps they have an existing SD-WAN architecture that they put in 4 years ago. So if the depreciation is coming up where it's going to be written off of the books, then that's when the CIO is saying, okay, let's take a look at what we have out there. If they happen to already have a ZTNA solution, then they're most likely going to try to figure out as their way to consolidate both of those separate initiatives back to Jerry's point so that they are a collective, cohesive solution that solves multiple problems in one fell swoop. But that's hard because, again, to the point is that every organization is different in where they're at in their maturity model. So I think that trying to be informed of their roadmaps at the top and middle sections of the organizations, that helps solution things better because everybody's pain points are completely different.
Yeah, I think
I
you.
think I think one other thing to add to Kurt, because I think it's important, and you kind of touched on it slightly, is that again, these are 3 to 5 year decisions, right? The reality of the situation is you're not actively constantly thinking about or evaluating these different elements. Every 3 to 5 years, the board comes to you and says, hey, what are we doing? We need to reconsider, reevaluate that. So I spin back to what I said earlier. It's just really about taking that step back. It's taking some logical time to really evaluate what truly matters to you. Because again, there's a million different ways to skin the cat, but that doesn't mean that all of them make sense for your business.
One thing that we do when we talk to customers is we sometimes we're better than other times depending on the sales team, but we really spend the first meeting just listening and doing the discovery. And just like Kurt mentioned, what are your pain points today? That is an absolute, focus of that we're doing. The next thing that Jerry mentioned is what are your business outcomes that you're trying to accomplish in parallel? So what are your pain points? What are your business outcomes? And then we go down to what is your architecture today? Where are your users? On-prem, remote, etc., third parties, and where are your applications right now? What are your critical applications? Where do they reside? And what are your not so critical applications? And where do they reside? And we take all that information and then we design that journey, and it is a journey and it is a phased approach. It's not like a rip and replace or anything like that. But yeah, all of those are really great points. I just wanted to emphasize that.
Yeah, Yulia, I think you make a great point. One of the things that we talk about at C3 is, what is SASE and how am I supposed to consume it, right? And I think there's a misconception that it's an all or nothing type of a framework, or even that SASE is like a technology, right? When really it's this framework of technologies that are unified in a cloud native fashion. And I like to use the pizza analogy of, you don't have to eat the whole thing at once. It might not be best for you and your organization. Others might be starving and they need every single slice, but you might just need a slice of CASB and a little bit of cloud firewalling with your SD-WAN. It really is something that you can grow into over time if you so choose to. So
Well,
great,
Stephen,
great
another
discussion.
thought. I'm assuming a lot of our audience is thinking about, if they're told that the roadmap is to redo a part of the architecture that includes some significant implementations that we're talking about here, our audience is thinking about the risk, right?
Yeah.
Back to your point, Yulia, that if you come back with a straw man project plan and you're talking about something that it could be a 12 to 18 month deployment cycle, that the risk to the existing production environment is significant. And so being able to understand all of the things that our customers are thinking about in a way that takes the risk into account is also very important.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to our next piece in this renewal path conversation. This is I think more towards Yulia and Kurt. When we look at the path of extending your current investment, keeping your architecture kind of where it is, or just bolstering it. What are the most common reasons that teams choose to extend that SD-WAN architecture instead of modernizing it, right? Like, what does the strategy, when does that strategy become risky? You just mentioned, Kurt, the risk that needs to be mitigated there. Like, what are those scenarios, and how would you, work with organizations that are, facing that tough decision?
Yeah, I would say the word you use is tough. We've seen organizations, and I've been a part of them too, where you look at the cost benefit that you're trying to articulate to the board or to the executive team, and it doesn't necessarily show the return on the investment in a way that some organizations require, right? So that it's a large uplift, and that large uplift is heavy labor, and it's a lot of downtimes. And if you're in an enterprise class organization that says we have to schedule our downtimes 3 months in advance,
Mm-hmm.
all of those things will sometimes table the replacement of legacy architecture because the risk is too great, or the timeline for mitigation is too long.
Yeah, Kurt, I think you hit on everything that I was going to in terms of the ROI for each customers based on their assets. Where are they at in their current contracts? Where are they at in terms of how long do they want to sweat those assets? How many years do they have left? And then in parallel is what they're trying to achieve, and the tools that are available nowadays in our, to us to be able to offer to customers, and where are they at in that, crossover break even point. And it's sometimes, it makes sense to pull the trigger. And again, this is a long journey. It's a phased approach. And sometimes it may be, we'll sign you up for another 2 years and then let's revisit that conversation again, because you have other priorities. You're investing in digitization, you're investing in movement to the cloud, you're investing in other things, and we feel like as a company, you're going to be fine for the next couple of years, and therefore let's revisit that conversation later.
Something
Another
I wanted to
interesting.
add, Steve, is that having been on the other side of the table more than I've been on this side, our audience might be thinking, well, how in the world do I get past this? Because I can't just keep deferring this. One of the tactics that my teams and I have used over the years is that it goes back to the roadmap, where socializing with the leadership above me and the board about the need, right? And then having some time to articulate what that need means from a cost perspective, risk perspective, all the things that organizations are thinking about and worrying about. Asking to get into the roadmap for the next year, and being able to then kind of sandbox that so that it's socializing with all of the decision makers that this is going to hit us, and we're going to wait till 2027 to do it, and then take those 12 months between now and then to have all of those the calculations and the business cases done. What I found is that it's awfully challenging in current year to get everybody's minds wrapped around the complexity of that risk.
Another element too that I think often gets overlooked here, guys, and I think everybody else on the panel would probably agree with me here, is that modernization is not a dip your toe in type approach. If it's a direction that you want to go down, completely understand it. But oftentimes I've seen lots of customers that want to take and perpetuate the mistakes that they've made in the previous 3 installations or configurations that they've applied and just continue to bring them and drag them on. I was working with a large organization out of Texas, and they had taken their checkpoint configuration that they had applied to Palo, and they were really not understanding why their layer 4 firewalling configuration on their Palo Alto wasn't really delivering on their expectation, and why they had to manage it all with these third-party tools because they're doing everything at layer 4. And then they're coming to Cato and they're looking to do the exact same thing again. Like this isn't a halfway in type scenario, right? Your board is coming to you, but why are they coming to you? Are they coming to you for modernization because they hear the latest and greatest buzzwords and those are the things that they should do? If you're going to invest your time and energy on replacing all this gear and putting in all new things, don't do it in a way where you're actually stepping back into the previous architecture, because that's essentially what I see happen way too often.
All right. Thanks, Jerry. And team, let's move to Zero Trust. Tom, this question is for you. From what you've seen across customer networks, I'm sorry. Tom, from what you've seen across customer networks, which limitations of traditional VPNs surface the most? Is it scalability, security gaps, latency, or a lack of user context awareness, or something else?
No, it's a great question. And typically we see this a lot, right, with folks that are looking at modernization. And so, VPNs, you're going to have a VPN concentrator, and that was meant for allowing network access, right? And so once you are provided network access, there's no really validation, no device posturing after connection. So it's wide open access at that point. So it's really not more or less about like looking at performance. It's more about looking at context awareness, applying policy, and then scalability. So when we think about like a global reach, and we saw this during the pandemic lockdown, everyone was going more towards remote work at home. This really was a proliferation of like looking at the mobile user and the security posturing capabilities that, from a context awareness. I think that's something where traditional VPNs, right, provides high risk for folks that are in compliant environments. It also does not give you complete awareness or visibility or policy to check the device to provide lockdown capabilities. And so that's something where I think implicit trust is no longer an option in the ecosystem. And we need to be moving more towards identity awareness focus, and architecture focus, for, proper business alignment and business outcomes.
I say the other element too, Tom, and I think you'd probably agree with me here, is it's not just about the remote user. It doesn't really matter where the user's located. They can be on the road, they can be in a coffee shop, they can be sitting at the office. You should have the same contextual awareness to know and apply security rules no matter where they're at throughout the entire organization. And I think, again, it speaks to a more modernized architecture, because in a legacy architecture where all these things are siloed, the amount of overhead associated to trying to keep things consistent across the board is so much higher than a spot where you can just go into one centralized management orchestrator and just apply these changes and have them be globally dispersed throughout the entire organization.
Exactly. And just you think about even like contractor work, vendors that need to come in and perform work, et cetera. I mean, running in the enterprise space is very difficult to align with vendor management, vendor accounts, and try to provide, exact lockdown posturing and policies. So, I mean, there's multiple use cases in terms of like shifting away from traditional VPN to more context awareness approach.
Yeah, because right now the edge is everywhere.
Mhm.
Yes.
The edge is everything and everywhere. So it's a completely different ecosystem now.
Yep. And then we think about visibility. So as you kind of move into the stack, visibility, and being able to provide a little bit tighter control, as well as, we want to talk about the user experience as well, being able to measure that in terms of what's being consumed and what's being taken care of. And so when we think about like a VPN concentrator where everybody's coming into a funnel point, we move more away towards a zero trust model in dependent upon the use case and the technology that's being supplied from a SASE framework perspective, right? That could be anywhere. And so that performance is consistent, that edge is consistent, and the security posturing is consistent no matter what, no matter where you are.
Thanks, Tom. For the greater group here, keeping in with the zero trust topic, when an organization comes to you and they're saying, hey, we want zero trust, right? My board is coming to me and they're saying ZTNA, what is this? We need to implement it right now. What do you ask to help you understand what they mean and what they're actually trying to solve for?
So we found that to be a little bit trickier, right? Because if there's a bifurcation between a security group and a networking group, um, each of those audience has a different answer to that question. So I think I would still recommend going back into the macro question about the roadmap because a CISO is going to have his or her own roadmap as well as the director of infrastructure. And I'd say that trying to get both into the room to understand all of the security projects and initiatives that they've got, helping them to help us understand and explain what those mean to them and what business drivers are behind those. Because sometimes there aren't any business drivers; they're just told to implement a particular solution. So I would say getting that kind of clarity is a little tricky, but I'd say it's mandatory because you're asking a great question, and it's questions all of us on here are asking with our customers. They don't necessarily have those answers unless we can pull all of the right audience in.
Yeah, and I think, Kurt, too, another thing is you can't necessarily ask them what it is that they're looking to try to achieve. I think we need to do a better job of understanding what the actual outcomes are. Like we get really hung up on, oh, I want zero trust. What does zero trust mean to you? Like who the heck knows what it means? It could mean different things to every single person out there, especially when you start talking from a board level because their friend talked to some other guy that is their friend that said that this is how they could build this architecture out, and they have no idea what the meaning of it is. So ultimately, what is the outcome? What are you trying to achieve? Let's stop spending time on worrying about do they use segmentation? Do they do device identity? Do they do device posture? Like those things are all great, ideal things that we like to try to do. But ultimately, what are you trying to do to make the business safer? Let's understand what that is because we're going to get to the outcomes a lot sooner if we understand it from that aspect, and we are the experts. We do this day in day out, and that's not a knock on the people that are in the meeting here today. But we have conversations consistently day in and day out with all of these different customers, with all of these different IT people, and you can fundamentally take advantage of our experience because we're talking to them on a regular basis.
Jerry, have you noticed that in some of the conversations they will start and finish with the business directives about work from home, remote, back to the office, and then they start thinking about what the edge means to them in that new business model. Have you seen that too?
Yes, for sure.
The part where the additional part, I think, where we see the biggest challenges though is we'll have this initial conversation with the customer. We'll ask them some set of questions and we're going to try to figure out what to your point, what is their desired business outcome? What are they trying to achieve? And we'll set a certain number of rules, a minimal number of rules together, and we'll get them started. But the challenge that we have seen is the ongoing. Is really, I feel like ZTNA is very operational heavy, and you need to continuously refine based on the use cases. Where's the edge, right? Where's the user? From which device they're accessing? Which particular application are they accessing? In which department, right? All that contextual analysis, I think we further and further refine, and we do find that ZTNA actually is quite operationally heavy, if you will, for the ongoing support. So the startup and what questions that is difficult as we can tell, but also operationally speaking, ongoing, it is a partnership with a customer and it is a heavy operational partnership. At least that's our experience.
Especially in a traditional model, to your point, because you don't have the context that's being shared between all of these different engines. And without having that shared context, I think it's an impossible expectation to think that you're going to be able to identify who a user is, whether or not its device is compliant with all of these different engines, and hoping for good outcomes in those scenarios.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kurt, I think you said something pretty spot on before, about these siloed teams, right? Your security team, your network team, siloing like that is kind of a legacy approach in our opinion because of this, overlap of what networking and security actually is today. And that's where, we at C3 are trying to help evangelize. Let's bring all of those stakeholders to the table. Making decisions in a vacuum is pretty much why we have some of these disparate kind of best of breed approaches. Everybody has their favorite Lego in the box, but, if we're all going to build the same house, we got to have somewhat of a plan. So appreciate that.
All right. Last question about ZTNA. How application owners typically respond and react to ZTNA? And what's the best way to bring them into the process early? That's to the group.
Tom, did you want to go? So I'll go first. So I think that most organizations that we've worked with or I've worked with, there's an application rationalization project or initiative that is either starting or has finished. And in that rationalization, there are metrics that have been gathered and then reported on in terms of latency issues that might be present with a particular application, depending on where it starts and where it's finishing. Because of the way, back to Steve's point, SASE and ZTNA, it's a whole architecture. There's a lot of different moving pieces that are cloud focused. We've noticed that some application owners don't typically get a seat at the table so that they're not able to complain. But if there are complaints, there are going to be complaints about the way their applications are running, especially if they're legacy applications, right? If they're not built for a cloud architecture, they're not going to be happy because of the way the new architecture works.
Typical questions is going to be like, does it introduce latency? Does it break integrations or APIs? Authentication frictions, troubleshooting access if it fails. Those are all like questions that typically, come up. And then, application owners and they'll react cautiously. The best thing to do is to bring them in early to do the application mappings to help uncover potential dependencies and pitfalls that you need to plan for or account for when you're trying to design it.
It is a terrific point, Tom, because if you think about it, the application owner, they don't really care about the security, right? It's not their job. That's not their core responsibility. They're hyper focused on do I click this button and does the app work the way that it's supposed to? And so to your point, if you incorporate them early in the process, then maybe you can get buy-in. Because if you try to do it late and the thing doesn't work or latency is introduced, they're never going to be your friend and they're not going to listen to what you have to say.
Good stuff. Pivoting a little bit here, one of the things that we've seen at C3 with clients interested in SASE or WAN transformations writ large is concerns around data retention. We're hearing about the adoption of not only things like DLP, but trying to adopt CASB as well, and potentially marrying those two together. We're especially seeing that in the financial space. How are you seeing that with your clients today? And are they adopting all of these technologies at once in a holistic fashion, or maybe they're moving away from the Microsoft native tools, Purview and things like that? What does that look like in your day to day?
So I guess there's two different angles that I could look or answer the question, right? How do I see it from a vendor perspective, and how do I see it from a customer perspective? And there are two very different angles. One is you start talking about DLP or CASB in general, the proliferation of AI is made that incredibly significantly more powerful, because at the end of the day, the way that we traditionally did DLP is we looked at particular ones and zeros, and if they aligned, we stopped the user from being able to take that data out. But utilizing AI and machine learning, where we can actually be more proactive and identify exactly what's taking place, is completely going to enhance. I mean, a lot of people have DLP. Lots of customers have DLP. What percentage of them actually use it? I mean, I don't think that anybody on this panel would raise their hand and say that majority of customers use DLP. They do it because it's a checkbox, because when they signed up for the insurance, they said that they had to do that. So they can check the box now, but the reality is they're not actually doing the DLP component. As far as customers are concerned, I think that they know that their data is at risk, especially as you think about this whole new workforce. There's a whole new workforce out there, like agents that we have no control over, that could easily leak data at a moment's notice. There is a ton of risk associated to it. So I think that as a customer, I want to be able to control this information. It's just an incredibly large hill to have to climb over in order to be successful.
And I just want to piggyback on that, on what Jerry just mentioned, which is this is going back to one of your prior questions, Steve, which is, hey, what is a driver for customer evolution to SASE, SSC architecture? And I think the DLP is one of that, because for DLP, you need SSL decryption. And quite frankly, when I look at customers who have more traditional on-prem based hardware, they in very maybe single digits of the percentages is when customers have turned on SSL decryption. And you need that in order to do DLP, in order to be able to catch the data, right? Look at structured, unstructured, being able to basically action that. But for you to be able to do that, you really need this new architecture. So
beyond the fact that many of the manufacturers or providers out there are intentionally making it difficult to look at the traffic because they see it as risk and they don't want it, right? They're throwing out certificate pinning left and right, and it's going to break the inspection process or the way that we've traditionally done it. And so they're introducing risk by doing that themselves as well.
Excellent.
That's great perspective.
Let me ask another question here. Concerning DLP, what are some, and this is the group, what are some real world data protection pain points that you're seeing? Some examples that existing tools are really struggling with.
I mean, from my perspective, I use AI, and I know it's painstaking for you to go into every one of these things and hear the same thing over and over again. But the amount of risk, the average user doesn't understand what they're doing when they click that button and they type in that box. They don't have the realization of where that information is going and how somebody else can easily take it. and they think that they're just modifying some record or they're changing some little thing. And that's great. And it's great that they're getting the results and they're getting them quicker than they could ever do by themselves. But the risk associated to that data just being out in the ether is just so intense and extreme. It scares the heck out of me, let alone the fact that I think through like senior adults that are getting phone calls that are emulating their grandchildren's voices. Like I mean, I don't want to know what it's going to be like when we get old, because it scares the hell out of me.
Thanks for mentioning that, Jerry, because it's just because the tool is easy to use and it gives you what you want faster than some other methods, shouldn't make you ignore the potential security concerns, and that's definitely happening today. So thanks for making that point.
Well, and I'll piggyback onto what Jerry said. I think that in the world that we're living in today, right, there are many initiatives that are formal that require AI and machine learning as part of the strategy. So when they're evaluating solutions and vendors and all of the things in between, those are heavy considerations. And then, Yulia, you mentioned something earlier about the complexity and how many people it might take. The workforces within organizations across the world are changing. Because back to Jerry's point, if you hire a small group of people who their job is to write AI language-based instructions to review and monitor the observability, visibility, that kind of stuff, that's different than it was 5 years ago. And all of those things come into play. It's shifting the labor components, and that also introduces a bunch of other things too when they're trying to determine how to go after a refresh or a transformation.
I was reading an article earlier today. Was the gentleman was talking about how like 5 years ago when we would write code through AI, we'd have to go and see what it hallucinated about and see what modifications it made and whether or not it logically makes sense. And nowadays, you can actually get the AI engine to go and execute the code and see what the outcomes are and go back and modify its code based on mistakes that it's made. It's just insane.
Yeah, I'd agree. And then I think there's some also risk avoidance as people look to move towards SaaS platforms, that they're actually offloading the risk. And that's the other part when we're having like DLP conversations or even talking about zero trust, is there's this abstract of like I'm offloading risk and therefore I may not have to consider it. In, that's a misnomer. It still should be part of the equation.
That's a terrific point.
All right, just want to maybe pivot a little bit more. One of the things that is inherent with SD-WAN and SASE is something that is maybe less attractive, but still absolutely necessary, is the circuits and connectivity, right? It's become a commodity these days, but it is absolutely imperative that organizations know what they're buying, know how much capacity they're getting, and how to translate that into how to navigate through their WAN transformation. So kind of wanted to point this to Kurt first, but how often do you find that your customers lack an accurate circuit inventory, things like billing transparency, maybe even just like SLA tracking? And how do you see that impact modernization projects today?
Oh yeah, I think our audience would agree with me. I think it's very difficult without a dedicated small team of people who manage that. Now, if you're using a TEM, right, a third-party TEM to help you keep track of and manage all those relationships, that might be a different animal. But yeah, I think that's a real thing. I would say that most organizations have a better handle on the WAN architecture overall, right? I mean, there's many people that live in those organizations that have built it, right? They know where the bodies are buried. But to consider that MPLS is still heavily used in some organizations, that architecture doesn't lend itself, for some of the other things that we're trying to do. So replacing an MPLS environment with an HA pair of DIAs and all that could bring to the table, that's also introducing risk. Because you think about it, if you talk to a CIO and say, look, we can rip all of your MPLS out, or we can replace this with two DIAs configured in a hot or hot cold, whatever we need to do, that person's going to ask you, well, okay, well, how do we do this to make sure that you don't take my traffic down? How do we make sure that these cutovers are seamless? Because all of us here know that that's not necessarily true.
Where does your workload live? To your point, Kurt,
Yeah.
because we get into these conversations and we start talking about how MPLS is reliable, MPS is all these great things. But if I've moved all of my workloads up to the cloud, I'm not really I'm moving myself away from the actual workload rather than closer to it. Let alone the fact that at the end of the day, when you think about the way TCP was written, it was written in a time when the internet was unreliable, when the service was unreliable.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does this sync ACK process where it
Yeah.
validates that the data has actually been received. And the modern internet doesn't need that to the same degree. So you need to have tools in place that actually can mitigate the impact of those things.
Yeah. And so, pulling on that thread a little bit longer, in the traditional architecture that most of the organizations that I think all of us talk with, um, dedicated on-ramps to the CSPs are mandatory, have been, right, for years. So that mechanism was in place to provide that point aggregation at egress and ingress so that latency could be as minimized as possible. There are alternatives where you can possibly remove on-ramps, but back to Jerry's point, what if your organization has workload in Azure and has workload in AWS and happens to have 3 or 4 on-premise data center colos? Because that's the way that the organization has built its application infrastructure. That completely changes your WAN footprint. And so
Not
there's a
only that,
lot of it's complicated.
and not only that, Kurt, to your point, it becomes even more burden because as you think of building this out globally, it is an impossible feat for a single organization to do some of the things that many of the members of this panel, what their organizations have done, like peering with different providers or getting as close to the application stack as humanly possible. For you to be able to do that single-handedly, yeah, I mean, I give you a round of applause if you can manage it. But why own that piece if you can get somebody else to do it and do it much more effective than you could ever do it yourself?
Completely agree.
Let me ask here. We often see, in SD-WAN and SASE and network connectivity and circuit aggregation, one of the first challenges is really kind of learning to understand customer contracts, right? And Tom, this question is to you. Do you often see contracts creating a technical or operational risk with things like locked in bandwidth or crazy long terms, care dependence, or early termination difficulties?
Sure. I mean, it kind of goes back to like having a good circuit inventory, understanding your SLAs in contract flexibility. But well, unfortunately, I've been in that space before as an enterprise customer, right? And remembering what was signed to go from a contract perspective and pulling language out, and are there auto renewals involved? And by the way, if I call and upgrade bandwidth, I just renewed that circuit for another 3 years. All that comes into play from a WAN design when it comes to contracts and contract flexibility. So that can stall an organization. There could be some potential angst of elongating a solution because you've been locked into a vendor or maybe some specific sites. There can be some ways around those and working with vendors, but ultimately it is understanding that risk. And if you're not doing those things right, I would suggest certainly doing those if you're going to look at modernization is having that, understanding who your last mile is, what the SLA is related to that last mile. understanding your contract flexibility for up and down, and making sure you can make pivots.
I'd say also
In
too, Tom, thing that commonly see is not giving yourself enough time to actually evaluate what decision that you're going to make, right? You give
Yep.
yourself 2 months because the last thing you want is for two overlapping contracts, and that's completely reasonable situation to be in. But if you have expectations of going in and actually validating whether or not a technology is going to be a fit for the business, you really got to take a step back and start evaluating that early in the process so that you put yourself in a position to be successful.
Completely agree with that. Working with some customers and projects right now, some of those are locked into 12-month contracts with rolling periods. Because as I mentioned, they made changes, they made upgrades, so not every site is terminating at the same time. So we're doing a phased rollout, transitioning them while integrating into their MPLS and transitioning them to an SD-WAN SASE solution set. So those things are there, but they started a year ago, right, in evaluating the platforms, the features that were most important to them, and then road mapping out in a proof of concept to ensure that, right, that their business was going to continue in a coexistence mode, knowing that they had elongated contracts. And so those are things that are really key.
I will acknowledge that as a service provider, it is tricky and we don't make it easier. But the reason, one of the impetus for these situations is because as a service provider, particularly for larger customers, these are deployments that last months. If it is our very largest customers, they are years. So from the moment when we start, and let's say we have a really large Fortune X customer, I mean, we will install 100 sites a month for that customer. That could take us 12, 18 months. And therefore, the contract termination for that set of 100 sites is different. So as just an advice to our customers, if you can also try to negotiate that with your service provider and to be like, you know what, let's align all of the end dates to whatever, or, whatever date that you guys can negotiate with. I mean, that could really simplify your ability to go to the next generation or even to jump providers, more easily.
It's a great point. That's exactly some of the things I would suggest too, is making sure your service provider is going to work with you on contract end dates so that you reduce overlap billing or eliminate overlap billing so that when you do your turn ups, right, that you're not impacting the organization. Because, well, let's be honest, I mean, if you're ordering and reprovisioning new circuits or you're converting existing circuits, it could be a hot cut to a transformation. Problems do come up, and so flexibility with your provider is really key and important.
Awesome. Great discussion, everybody. I want to do a quick little lightning round to wrap us out here. Maybe each of you go and give me maybe 30 seconds worth. I want to talk about, from your perspective, supporting customers, what network or security shift do you believe they must prepare for in 2026?
I don't want to bring it up again, but AI.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else other than that. I think everything is really aligning in that space. Yeah.
I completely agree with that. That is not just the buzzword, but that is what's going on in almost every business and customer conversation is the proliferation and just evolution of AI and how it's going to integrate. So that really is
And
the biggest thing of focus right now for this next year in the future.
and I'll dig in just a little bit, just go a touch deeper, Steve, because I think it's going to add value. It's not the AI that we know. It's not the chat GBTs or the open AI or the Gronks of the world that you have to be concerned with because everybody knows what those are.
Mhm.
It's the reality is every single vendor out there, they're also introducing AI, and all of those AIs also introduce risk. Cato does a publication. In the publication, we scanned all of our 6,000 plus customers and we evaluated them from an AI perspective. And some of the trends that we saw, I mean, we had 900 customers that were utilizing BodyGram. Does anyone know what BodyGram is? It's essentially an AI engine that measures what you look like and how you weigh so that you can be a healthier person. The point I'm trying to make isn't to talk about this application, but rather the risk associated with the fact that people in your organization are on your computers or on your devices typing into bodygram some random piece of information that could expose data to the entire world.
Yeah, and really the workloads. I mean, I agree. Two things that I'm hearing from the panelists that I agree with is that that how fast, really the pace at which AI is evolving, and how customers and vendors and service providers, we need to really keep the pulse on, and we need to be uber flexible at this stage and uber adaptable. And then just the massive amount of CPU and compute that's necessary, that AI is driving in different parts, that we need to accommodate for.
Beyond the fact that the threat actors, they have no issues using it and going all in on it, while the rest of us are sitting here taking a step back saying, do we really want to choose this as the avenue that we go down? There's no risk for them. There's risk for us. So we have to try to figure out how to balance that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for your perspectives and insights today. I think this has been a really great conversation. And thank you to the audience for joining us today. I think for next steps, what I'll say is go ahead and download that 2026 SNS Pulse Report. A lot of great insights from the organizations represented here and Mark and myself. Also, if you want to learn more, please reach out to your C3 advisor or an engineer like myself or Mark, and let's schedule a follow-up network or security evaluation and, dig a little deeper with you. Finally, I want to thank our panelists and their organizations for joining us today. Cato Networks, Comcast Business, GTT, and US Signal. We really appreciate your partnership and participation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Take care.
Yep.